And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Kat Dunkle, who after her near-death experience went from an angry atheist to a believer in God. Kat, thank you for joining me today and welcome.
Yes, thank you, Jeff, for having me. I always appreciate being able to share and hopefully to help people understand that they don't have to fear dying. And that's something I think everybody does fear. You know, I grew up in a home where very little religion was taught or anything. My mother was a Catholic, but we very seldom went to church, and certainly my father never did either. So God was something I just kind of believed in as a child because everybody else did. I also believed in the tooth fairy and a lot of things that I later on in life decided wasn't the right thing. So as I grew, like I said, my parents both drank a lot. Home life was not pleasant at all. And it was just a very, very difficult journey for me. But as I grew into my teen years and started recognizing that life was different, my father was transferred all over the United States. And in that, I was always going to a new school. And new schools always had different curriculums. And so it was very difficult to learn. Like most things I learned in life were self-taught. And you go to a school and it's just like looking at Greek because they're totally teaching something that I hadn't ever seen before. So I had self-doubts. I became very self-conscious and always walking into, I don't know if you ever had to walk into a new classroom or everybody did, but it's a frightening experience as a kid. And everybody's staring at you. And if you're from another state or something, they think you talk funny when they said things like y'all and and I didn't. So that would single you out. Again, adding more self-loathing to myself, or I'm different and I'm not the same as the rest of the kids. And so that was always hard. And I started questioning whether God really existed when a friend of mine was in a car wreck. His name was Stephen, and he died. And we're going to his funeral. Here, this was 16 years old. He was just like a plastic doll. You know, it wasn't really him. And he looked like him and everything. But and I thought, where did he go? You know, where do you go when you die? What's going to happen when I die? I think it was the first time I'd really thought about mortality or what happens, life after death. You just kind of at that age, you're nothing's ever bad going to happen to you. So I finally started doubting God and starting wondering why my life wasn't like the other kids and why I wasn't like the other kids. And so my faith in God just was dwindling. And I tried to believe in God. I wanted to, and I was frightened. I wanted to believe somebody was in control of something somewhere. And I wanted so badly. So I went to every church I could find. I don't care what it was, a Holy Rollers or whether, whatever, anybody that would give me one shred of hope or evidence. And I couldn't find anybody. I looked and looked and looked for several years, actually. And finally just gave up and thought, this is it. When the lights go out, the lights go out, and just finally learned to accept that. And I did not believe in God. Well, I jumped into a marriage, a very bad marriage, very young. I was 17 years old. And by the time I was 21, I had two little babies, two little kids, and was married to a alcoholic absolutely abusive alcoholic that I detested. I don't think I ever really loved him. I had never felt love in my entire life or what that felt like. And while I was married to him, I went out into the living room. I remember looking up at the Kansas sky and saying, God, if you're really up there, if you really exist, then would you just give me 1 year of knowing what it's like to feel love and to be loved and love somebody else and just 1 year of happiness, being happy? What is that? And but I just turned away from the window that night because I knew God didn't exist. And so it wasn't long after that I just packed my two sons up in an old beat up car, and we took off from Kansas City, where I was living, to Seattle, Washington, where I had family. But when I got there, that wasn't going to work out. So I ended up in government housing, and we didn't have food to eat. We didn't have furniture. We slept in sleeping bags on the floor by a gas heater thing that heated the whole unit where we stayed. And there was a little pilot light there, and we got our sleeping bags and we'd curl up there and pretend that was our campfire and we were camping. So, we'd run through the house and play games. There was nothing to break. So you'd scream and yell and have a good time, go to the library and buy books and read. And so we found ways to be happy, and we were. It was much better than the situation I had left in Kansas City. So anyway, the boys and I got a job finally and was able to put together furniture and a nice little place for us there, and found a nice lady to watch my boys. And at this job, I had actually started the first customer satisfaction business or thing in the entire United States. I started calling up customers at a car agency, people that bought cars or had their cars serviced. And back in the 60s, that was a really shaky business. I mean, it was bad news. And I would call these people up and ask them if they were happy with the service they got. They thought I was a big joke. I mean, are you kidding me? You don't, car agencies don't do anything like this. Well, I found out all sorts of information, and I took it to the owner, and he was, oh my God, this is wonderful, and so he made me a manager. I didn't make any more money, and back then women did not make a lot of money, and so but I had a title and I got to drive a brand new car as a manager. So but this was the start of customer satisfaction. There wasn't any J.D. Powers Award of Excellence, and there wasn't any anything of that sort. Nordstrom's hadn't even talked about customer satisfaction at that point. So this was actually the beginning of all these people that are calling you up and asking if you're happy with things. It all started there in Seattle, Washington, back in the early 60s. And so a lady that I worked with came to me one day and she said, I've got just the man you're going to marry. And I said, no, I'm not getting married ever again. That was the last thing on my agenda. And but I, for some reason, went said okay, and this voice called me that night, wanting me to go skeet shooting. And I thought, I don't know what a skeet is, and I didn't want to kill one, but I agreed for some reason. And but it snowed thankfully the next day, and we couldn't go kill the skeet. So actually, a skeet is a little clay pigeon that you shoot up in the air. So anyway, we didn't do that, but I met Dawn, and we saw each other every single day for 27 days. And on the 27th day, a friend of his, a man that he worked with, came in where we were sitting and said, what is it going to take for you? He was so drunk he couldn't even stand up, but he wanted to know what it would take for us to get married. And Don leaned over the table and he said, well, if we had $200, we'd go to Reno and get married tonight. Well, back then, $200 was the same as $5,000 today. So, and I was shocked. I mean, I knew I was feeling love for the first time in my life towards Don, and it scared the heck out of me because I didn't know what to do. I just felt this love for him. I knew it was love, but it was amazing. So it was in February, February 9th, we headed to Reno, Nevada with the check that his drunk friend wrote for him, $200, and we were married in 28 days after knowing each other. And he was like this dream. I mean, he was so handsome and he was so sweet and so nice and kind. And in his house, he had boxes of crystal and china, the things that he'd bought in the Navy when he was there. And just the life couldn't have been better. The boys had a daddy, and life was so wonderful. Well, then my husband had just bought a tavern a few months before it happened really quickly. He was in real estate and had a fairly decent job, but the tavern scared me because of alcoholic parents, because of being married to an alcoholic. I didn't want any part of it, but I knew it was his dream to have his own business, so I let him go. Well, I never worked in the tavern except for on Monday nights. We had a crab feed, and it was a big affair, just packed full of people. So I worked that night. So I left the boys this one April 6th, and I left the boys and went to work that night. And as I walked in the door, Don was intently listening on the phone, and I couldn't figure out why he'd be talking on the phone. The place was packed. It was so busy. And he let down the phone and came over and grabbed my arm and took me out the door, saying things that I just didn't comprehend, that Mark, my middle son had been hit by a car. And he said it was on Roxbury Street. I knew the cars went very fast on Roxbury Street. We got to the hospital just the same time as the ambulance pulled up, and they took Mark out of the ambulance, and he was just lying there very still. And the doctor came running out asking, how did this happen? How did this happen? And I didn't know how it happened. We didn't know. So we were led to a room. An hour after excruciating hour went by, and we heard all the voices of the hospital, code red, and they'd rush into Mark's room, and they came out and asked if we would call a priest. And I was so angry. I didn't believe in God at all anyway. And I was shook. I was, no, don't send a priest in there. They're working on Mark. I don't want the priest bothering them. And so the priest came, and he went in anyway, and he shut the door right in my face practically. And I just was yelling at him, don't go in there. I don't want you to in there. Mark's going to be fine. Anyway, we were walking down the hall the next morning and looking out the window at cars going by and the lights coming on in houses. We thought, how can they just be normal? I mean, did they not know that there's a life slipping away here, and new life being born, and another little child dying? And I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I didn't want to turn around because I knew what was going to be said. And it was the doctor saying that they couldn't save Mark. We went into his room, and he was so cold, and I took the covers and put them up over close to him to keep him warm. And there was a tear in his eye, and I told him, as a Marky, don't cry because mommy's here. As if mommy could make things all fine, I could make everything okay for him. And so then we left the hospital, and life after that changed drastically. I was angry, and people would try to pacify me by saying that he was with Jesus now. And I would scream at them, what does your Jesus need with my son? I just couldn't understand anybody trying to tell me about God, because if God existed, I hated him for what he would do about the horrible things in life and killing little children. You're going to tell me there's a God that sees this? And I was just so angry. Well, Don and I, our relationship that had been absolutely perfect for an entire year, just like the vow I made back in Kansas that night out the window, just give me 1 year of happiness and take my life, devastate me, was coming true. I mean, here my son died, my father dropped dead of a heart attack, and we started going bankrupt in our business. We were making no money. And then when Mark died, we had massive bills from doctors and hospitals and ambulances, and also funeral parlor and caskets and things that, just overwhelming, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And we were in our 20s. So the pressure of being in debt, all Mark dying, all this happening, just made Don and I not getting along. We were fighting with each other. And I would sit in the house day after day after day, just sitting there rocking back and forth. I couldn't leave. I couldn't smile because I felt guilty. Moms aren't supposed to lose their children, and it's a devastating effect. Many of your listeners there that have lost children, I have such great compassion for you, but I want you to know that they are here, they're with you, and will be, and they're fine. Trust me, please. Anyway, we started bickering with one another, and Don wanted me to get out of the house, so he took me one night. He said, we're going to go over to our friend's house for the evening. And I started fighting with him. No, I don't want to go. I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to smile. I don't want to do that. So as we were leaving the house, we're fighting. We get out to the car. We're arguing more. Pretty soon we're screaming at each other and driving down the street and just screaming. I know the anger and the bitterness and the frustration, everything was just coming out at me and out of me. And Don was telling me that I had to move on, and I'm going, move on? I'll never move on. And I just came across the bucket seats of our car, just wanting to smash him, to shut him up somehow. And I'm just flailing away at him and tearing at his face. And he took his arm like this to shove me back over to my side of the car. It hit me in the side and towards the back. And that blow caused my liver. Your liver has a sac around it that protects it because it's kind of like jelly. So the sac protects it. It had exploded and blew my liver into several pieces, and I had massive internal bleeding. But back in the 60s, where they don't have MRIs, they don't have CAT scans, we had gotten to the hospital because I was having this horrible, horrible pain. And anyway, when we got to the hospital, they couldn't find, didn't know what was wrong with me, but they saw my blood count was dropping drastically. My blood pressure, everything was going down. They came in and the doctor asked me how I got the bruise on my back. And I didn't want to tell them because I didn't want them to think Don was a wife beater, because he's not. If anything, I was beating him up. So I told them I didn't know, but there was a bruise on my back. So they suspected I had some type of internal bleeding. And they said I'd have to go into surgery right away. Well, they took me in the gurney down the hall into the surgery room, and the masked people there leaning over me. And I saw them all around me and started to put the mask over my face. And I knew I should go under, but I didn't. And I could see the doctors and the nurses around me. But then things started going black. And everything went completely black, and I couldn't breathe. And I started to panic because I couldn't get my arms up. They were tied down or was secured anyway for surgery. And but I couldn't breathe, and everything was black, just total darkness. And I was struggling so to breathe. And just like you're drowning in a lake somewhere, you can't. Your lungs are bursting, and you just have to breathe, and you can't. And so I'm in this blackness, and I felt myself move through the blackness out the other side of it into a cave, I guess, or a tunnel. And all of a sudden I realized I didn't need to breathe anymore. And I was still felt some panic, but not as much. And then I started moving through this tunnel, and I saw my husband and my two other sons down below me, and they were around what appeared to be a lamp post, and they were crying. It was raining, and they were crying. And I wanted to tell them, don't cry, I'm fine, everything's okay, I'm alive, it's okay. And I moved on, and as soon as I felt really could tell they were going to be just fine. And I moved on, and I saw 4 human beings in clothes, and they weren't angels because they didn't have wings, but they looked very concerned for me, very, like they were worried for me. And I didn't recognize these people. They could have been distant relatives or something. I don't know. I've heard things like that. So possibly, I just don't know who they were, but they looked very concerned. And I passed by them. And then the thought came to me, there is no God. And all of a sudden, this horrendous noise, louder than a freight train, was going right through my head, and this feeling of a rope burning through the middle of me, like it's going 100 miles an hour. And it almost to me like God was burning out all of the doubt and fear in me. I don't know, but why that noise and rope burning, I have no idea what the significance of that is, other than what I just said. But then when it just stopped, and all of a sudden I knew God did exist. I mean, I've got my hand right here, and Jeff, you see my hand there, right? I can tell you that's not my hand, or I'm looking at it. Nobody's going to convince me that's not my hand. I knew that much. I knew God did exist. And it was not any doubt, anything. I just knew it. And then I started moving forward again, and I saw this brilliant light, and that noise came again, just this horrendously loud noise, and then burning through the middle of me. And then I started going towards that light, knowing that was heaven. I knew that it was heaven. And just as I got almost to there, it was almost like a door or some kind of structure holding the light back. And as I almost got there, and the bottom dropped out, just like you're in an elevator and the floor just went and you started dropping down into the darkness. That's what happened. And I knew I was in hell. I knew I was in some part of hell. I think there are different parts of hell, but I know I was there. And I felt this total separation from God that I just knew existed, from heaven, from this feeling of this peace that you cannot explain to anybody, this utopia, this feeling of just nothing but joy and something I can't explain. The Bible talks about the peace that passes all understanding. Well, it's way beyond that. I mean, it was incredibly wonderful. So I felt this separation from God, like God didn't even know I was there, like God didn't even enter into this place. So he wasn't going to save me. Nobody could save me. Nobody cared. Nobody even knew I was there. It was total darkness, totally being completely separated from anything or anybody. I mean, and I knew that I had sent myself there. I had blasphemed God. I had laughed about, joked about God. I did not believe in God. I hated God. All these things I felt I just knew that I had sent myself there, that God didn't send people to hell. He doesn't. He does not send people to hell. And so, I mean, we send ourselves there. I don't know anything about all of that, but I know that it exists. That's all I know. I could hear others screaming, but nobody really close to me. I could feel pain of burning, but I could not see flames. Everything was totally dark. I felt that sensation of falling continued, and I knew that I would never hit bottom. I'd never die. I'd never commit suicide. Nothing I could do but to fall into this total darkness. And I know that other people have described hell as seeing demons and all these other things. I did not see any of that. So maybe there's different parts of hell. I don't know. And maybe I was just in the entryway. I have no idea, but it was more horrible than anything I could possibly describe. I think the biggest pain and the most horrible thing was the total separation from absolutely everything, being totally 100% alone, falling into darkness for the rest of eternity. And I was screaming out to God, I believe in you, God. I believe in you. I know you there. Please save me from this. I was screaming the whole time. And all of a sudden, it just started spiraling backwards, going backwards, back into the tunnel, going out to the tunnel. And there in that space, I wanted to stay. I didn't want to come back to life. And I heard this voice say to me, bring people to me. I don't know what that meant, but as that happened, I felt the will to live, an actual will to live, a thing, enter back into my body, and I came through that and back to being alive. When that happened, when that will to live, which I believe is my spiritual self, entered back into my body, I woke up wanting to live. I had that desire, I'm going to live. I was excited to live at that point. Prior to that physical thing happening, of that spirit entering back into my body, or the will to live entering back into my body, prior to that, I would have left my husband, who I loved very much, my children, who I adore. I would have left them to stay in that place for eternity, knowing that they would be there eventually too. But that was how big of a draw it was to stay there with God in that glory, that place that nobody could explain. That's how strong it was. But when the will to live entered back into me, when the spirit entered back into my body, I wanted to live then and was excited. So pretty much that's my story. And we lived happily ever after that. After that, I started having this dream of how to start a business. I started the first customer satisfaction business in the United States, and it's still going today. It's called Customer Research Incorporated, and it was a very successful business that gave us a lot of wealthy way to live. I mean, God has been so good to us, the blessings. But I have spent the last 50 years doing just what I felt God told me to do, and that was to bring people to Him. So I tell people, yes, God is real, heaven is real, and unfortunately, hell is real. And those things I explain it a lot deeper in a book I wrote. But that's my story. I lived happily ever after. So,
well, Kat, you have an amazing story, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
When you first recognized God was real, did you still have hate for him at that time?
No. I didn't have remorse over having the hate. I don't think I felt anything except real, just excitement, just to know God really exists, after all those years of not believing and not having the faith, I can remember saying to people, they'd tell me just have faith, and I'd say, how do you get faith? I don't know how to get faith. You tell me how to get it then, but I just came then, but I didn't,
I'm not trying to debate you. I'm just trying to put together, why do you think that you had that hell experience?
Why I had the hellish experience?
Yeah. Do you think you were punishing yourself because you had so many years of hating God or you had maybe a guilty conscience?
I don't think I would have had the fervor to really try to keep people from going there, or I don't know. I mean, I think evil is evil, and I'm not sure you can ever change that. We know that evil exists on this earth, and there are evil people. We know that half of heaven left, and Satan left heaven, the heavenlies too. And so we know there's real pure evil. Evil can't exist with good. And I had to know that hell did exist, and it does. And the evil cannot live with goodness. It just can't. It don't mesh together. I wouldn't want to be in a heaven that was full of evil like this earth is. Some people think this is hell. Well, this is nothing compared to what hell is. And we can always get away from our circumstances. I mean, my sons and I lived in the worst of circumstances. No food, no furniture, nothing, sleeping bags on the floor with cockroaches. And we were happy.
Since your NDE, did you notice that you had any new mental abilities that you didn't have prior, like clairvoyance or something else?
I feel people's pain. I literally feel their pain. And I could be walking by somebody in a grocery store, and I know something terrible's happened. I've actually stopped people. I try to say it like in a way that won't frighten them, but I don't know if I have the opportunity to say something to them, which I would never have done before, or stop on the street, with somebody that is, you could tell is downtrodden or whatever, those types of things. But that's about the only thing that I changed. I mean, I went to 120 degrees and have for 50 years. I've never wavered. 50 years, my life has been devoted to this. And so what did that? I mean, I was a hardcore atheist and angry person. And I went boom. And my husband, I mean, he was so thankful. and people who knew me, it was amazing transformation, amazing.
Did you tell people about your experience after it happened, or did you wait a while?
No, people, because of the directive I had, bring people to me, which I feel came from God. I right away told everybody, but I didn't bring anybody to God. I scared everybody half to death, telling them my story. So it wasn't until I really got back into trying to find out what God was all about. I went back to the Catholic Church, and I didn't really learn anything there because it was in Latin, and I didn't learn anything. I went to another church where they taught about things, and I just could not get enough. Once I really started opening up my mind and learning that God really is real, and taking it from that point rather than prove it to me, I didn't have that attitude. You didn't have to prove anything to me. I knew. So now just teach me. And I was just like a sponge. I was just, so I right away started telling people about my experience, but I wasn't very good at bringing people to God. It's just like I say, I was scaring them to death. But, and then I tried to write a book about it because I wanted just to document what had happened to me. And I did that, but it was, I rewrote that this time with an editor and doing it the right way. So I could have it all down so I wouldn't forget, but I've never forgotten. I mean, I don't prepare for a podcast like this. I just talk to you from my heart because that's who I am.
I think that's the best way. I mean, you just share your experience, and that's all you need to do, really.
Right.
You are so descriptive, and I don't have to ask too many questions because you gave us everything, you know?
Well, if anybody has any questions, I'd like them to feel free to contact me on my AOL. It's THEKAT137@AOL.com. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. And again, my book pretty much tells this whole story and a lot more. I go through the death of a son and death of a child, what that true feeling is like, and how I overcame it. The near-death experience is all the detail in it. So the book is called "Is It Safe to Die?" I don't know if you can see this or not, but
and where do we get it?
It's available on Amazon, but when I Google it, I had to put the word book first. Book, is it safe to die? Because if I just Google, is it safe to die? Google tries to tell you, no, not really. So, and give you all the reasons. So anyway, that's what I did.
If somebody came to you who had recently lost a loved one, what kind of advice would you give them?
That's really hard because they're in such horrible pain. I don't think there's a pain worse than losing a child, because you're not supposed to die before your kids do. But I would give them hope. I'd hold them and say, I know what you're going through. I've been there. And, I want you to know that it is okay, that you're going to be okay. They're fine. They're fine. They're where they need to be and want to be. And you're going to be together. They're with you. I mean, just believe that in your heart. And it does get better. It does get better. Never forgotten, but it does. It can be a joyful time, remembering the beautiful memories that you have with them. So you don't want to ruin that by thinking of the negative and bad things.
Would you say that the experience is dreamlike or more real than being here?
It was definitely not a dream. I thought about that too. I thought about, could it have been drug induced? I was studied for 20 years by a professor, Dr. Bruce Grayson. He also wrote a book called Alive, and my story is in his book on page 144. But he studied me for over 20 years, and of course, those were questions I asked him. He spent his whole life studying near-death experiences and doing nothing but that, and he's probably the biggest expert in that field, or one of them for sure. Anyway, I asked him, could it have been drug-induced? He said no. He said a drug-induced hallucination would have been fragmented things, not a sequence of events like I had. Also flashes of light, not this brilliance that I described. So nothing that I described had anything to do with it being hallucinations or from drug induced. Others have said maybe it was oxygen deprivation. When you're deprived of oxygen, you could go through things. People that drowned have, these beautiful experiences, but he told me that could not have been, lack of oxygen wasn't the issue. I'm sorry, it totally slipped my mind as to why that, but it's in my book. There's a reason why all those things, questions that I had asked him, he was able to answer them. And I had a lot of questions too. I wanted to dismiss anything that could have negated what I had just gone through. So it definitely was not a dream. It's just as real as I'm sitting here talking to you, and just as real as anything. It was life. It was true. It happened. It was not a dream. Was not the fragmented thing of a dream. And no, it definitely wasn't a dream. It was just these sequence of events that were, like life would be, not anything like a dream, nothing like that.
Has the memory of the experience faded over time?
No, that's another thing. I mean, I after 50 years, my brain, my age gets a little fuzzy, but no, that experience, I have to say, is just as powerful and just as real to me as it was then. And the knowledge of knowing, and like I say, given age and everything, 50 years is a long time. So, for that not to have faded, for that not to have grown old, or anything, to still have that fervor of the day it happened. That doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen.
Do you fear death at all?
Oh, no. And I did. I did as a young adult, but no. And there are so many people. I was just responding to a lady before I came on here she's just mortally fearful of dying. She just is constantly on her brain and everything. But I don't fear dying. I don't. I just I know that even if you want to just say this, that there is something out there. If you're not willing to accept the fact that there is a God, or if you're blaming God fall on earth or to you, God doesn't make those things happen. And we're not puppets that God made us with our free will to live life, everybody to live their lives as they want. So the murder and the horrible things that go on on earth are certainly not from God induced. And could he stop it all? I don't think he'd make a liar out of himself if he did. So, and he's not a liar. So we have this free will to do what we want. And so to not believe in God, I couldn't do that. I mean, I know it's real. I know it is. So I don't fear death, and I would fear death. Sometimes I get this feeling: have I done anything that could send me to hell? And because to fear death, I guess I would fear that aspect of death. But no, I mean that isn't, because I believe that my sins are forgiven. I do believe that. I know that I am a sinner. I mean, I have done things and still do things that I feel conviction in my heart about. You shouldn't have done that, and I usually try to correct it or make it right away, but I still have evil lurking around in me. Ask my husband. So anyway, no, I don't fear that.
Do you have a website?
I don't have a website. I had one for years and I finally just kind of let it go, but I have my email that I've asked people to go ahead and reach me on. And again, in the book, all the information of contacting me there is in there, and I want people to feel free to do that.
Are you possibly working on another book?
I don't think so. This took me a couple of years to write, and that's my focus. I don't really have a lot of focus other than doing what I'm doing now, and so that's what I want to put my energy towards, is talking to people, trying to take away a lot of the pain, the fears that people have. And like I said, to me, the most horrible of that would be losing a child, but losing a loved one, losing your job, being told that you have cancer and you're going to die. These things are going on daily. So there's so much to be done, so much hope to give people, to steer them through that, because it can end up beautifully. It can end up the most wonderful, glorious thing that could ever happen.
Do you have anything else you're working on that you want us to know about?
Just this, just getting the word out. That's like I say, my main focus is completely 100% that. So I'm available, and it's kept me really busy. I enjoy that, and I want to do it. It's a desire of my heart to do this, and so.
All right, Kat, before we finish up, can you give us one last positive message?
No, but could I pray for you in the audience? Would that be offensive to anybody?
Not me.
Okay. Well, since it's your show, we'll just go with that. Okay. So I'm just going to say a short prayer. It's going to come from my heart. Lord, I just come before you today, just thanking you for this time. Thanking you for this opportunity that Jeff has given us to reach out to people that might be hurting, that might have issues today that they're dealing with, that they just don't have the answers to. God, I would just ask that you put a special touch in their hearts, put someone in their lives, Lord, that can lead them to a place of worship where they can learn about you, where they can learn how to have the peace that passes all understanding, the peace that you have given me. I thank you for that, Lord. I thank you for Jeff and the opportunity to be here, and for all the listeners that might be listening in today. Thank you.
Amen. Kat, thank you for that prayer, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.